A little bit about how easy it is to manipulate all of us. Let us meet a professional manipulator, Bill Stair. He is an artist, a sort of unlikely artist. Until a few years ago, he still had a day job at National Geographic, not just any day job either, I should say. He was actually in charge of their worldwide mapping organizations, operations, which would raise some questions about brain mapping, other types of mapping. These days, Bill is painting. It's amazing stuff, and I'm not going to try to describe any of it because I'm hoping he's going to show you some. Bill.
Can you hear me okay? Excellent, good. Well, Jeremy and Marge talked about the neuroscience of how we see and perceive color, line, shape, value. Marge showed us how artists foretold some of these same things. So I'm going to talk about how I discovered these same things. So it's a discussion on my methods and my experience in discovering and applying these visual processes. So to start things out, for me, the notion of aesthetics is really slippery, and I truly believe that anything can be art. But I've chosen a very traditional path, and that is painting canvas, figures, and faces. So I do big faces. And when I started painting 6 years ago, I was unwilling to start at the beginning with classes and lessons, and I just started to paint. I painted what I saw. And 6 years ago, you heard I left the best job I ever had at National Geographic, being in charge of their mapping group. So let me just talk for a moment about mapping. So here's the typical map, and you're all familiar with National Geographic maps. And today, I'm really using the same tools, the shape, line, color, to produce art. Back then, it was to produce two-dimensional maps. But so now I'm an artist using these tools, and there's a big difference. In mapping, it's very precise, it's accurate. There's no experimenting. There are no accidents. Accidents at National Geographic maps make the evening news. But as an artist, that's what I do. I experiment with visual perception. Accidents are a big part of what I do. Experimentation, I don't worry about accuracy, and I observe the results, and then I move on from there. So, keeping that in mind, I'm going to talk now about my process of discovery with big faces and eyes, caricature and line, selective detail, color contrast, and value or luminance. So a couple things about me. I'm color vision impaired. I now work with both my right and my left hand after having an accident. I never pre-plan a painting. I don't take notes along the way. I don't use an organized palette. I don't use measurements. I don't use formulas. I just paint what I see. So 6 years ago, when I started painting, someone told me, well, if you really want to learn how to paint, draw the human figure. And so that's what I did. But I've always preferred my drawings or my drawing-like paintings to my actual finished paintings. Finished paintings always became very tight for me. I just wasn't as interested in them. And my goal has been since then to paint like I draw. But no matter what I did, people kept saying the same thing. I love your faces. They were drawn to the faces, and they kept talking about it. And then a friend of mine said, why don't you focus on painting big faces? Then about the same time, I saw this painting. This is Marlene Dumas. And also about the same time, I found out that she had an exhibit in LA opening. And so at about the same time, I boogied out there, hopped on a plane and headed to LA. And I loved what she did. I loved her caricature-like faces. I loved the expressive eyes. I loved the red. And I loved the way she used the red. And I was already doing faces, eyes, and red. So this was an early painting of mine. And then I read that Mark Rothko said something to the effect that I paint big to be intimate, to encounter you. And I thought, isn't that exactly what Dumas was doing? She was painting big, and she was encountering me. And that's what I wanted to do. So I started painting big faces. And I put myself in these images. A few of them you'll see. So you'll see the size of them. And this is the first series of big faces. These are the small big faces. People had strong gut reactions to them. They reacted in ways that they couldn't, didn't, and wouldn't verbalize to me, but they just reacted. Now they're starting to talk about it. But at first, people really reacted strongly. And I was just painting local women, but at some level, viewers were identifying or projecting upon them. And I wondered, what is it that they're sharing with this image? Or what is it that they're telling me about themselves? Or what is it that they're sharing with me? And more than simply replicating visual appearances, I knew that I was tapping into something magical here. And it went beyond just simply faces and eyes and red and big. And I wonder today, what's the shorthand here that's involved? How does this visual perception trigger an aesthetic or an emotional response in some people? And I don't know. I saw Picasso's Guernica for the first time just a couple of weeks ago. I came up to the room and I almost didn't go in. I couldn't go in. This canvas is packed with faces, caricature, with light and line and metaphor. I could hear the screaming. I could feel the heat. I could feel it on my skin, and I was afraid to go in there. Well, I did go in. Now, I'm not surprised by my reaction to this painting, to Guernica. But several years ago, I was in Amsterdam, and I came around a corner and was confronted by Van Gogh's Wheat Field with Crows, and I broke down and cried. I've never done that before. Now, it wasn't till years later that I discovered this was his last painting. This is not a painting of a horrific scene like Guernica. So how did it solicit such emotion to me? Well, I would like to find that out. So I'm interested in why people react to my work, because they do react to my work. And it's the direction I'm going. And I sense that this all starts with visual perception. And that perception is somehow making a connection somewhere in our mind that's triggering this rush of emotion. And that's what I want to know more about. So let me tell you how I work real quickly. I do a sketch from a live model. And again, this is a bigger painting. I do a sketch from a live model, and then I take a chunk of charcoal about the size of my fist, and I spread it all over the canvas. I take a wet sponge, and I move it around as if I'm finger painting. And it's just the way I started to paint. So that's how one would look at this point without the color. And then I add black marks, and then I typically drip, splatter, or pour on a series of colored glazes, real thin paint, and I give it just, a little bit of color. Then lastly, I get a brush full of red paint, and I very aggressively stroke on the red paint. I've put a hole through a canvas. On some occasions, I actually hand the brush to the model, and I say, here, you put it on. Well, I knew right away that people went straight to the eyes because they talked about it all the time. They said they did. And from the very start, I've highly detailed, well, it's not highly detailed, but I put in a fair amount of detail into the eyes. And this selective detailing seems to increase people's interest in that. It seems that they like to go where there's some detail. And if I combine the detail in the eyes, well then I've got something going for me. And then more often than not, the whitest white and the darkest dark are in those eyes. It's the pupil and the highlights. And so, again, I think that's attracting to people, and I guess I don't need a brain surgeon to know that people are going directly to that point, and they're telling me, this is the focal point. And people seem to be wired to go to that. So let me talk a little bit about color. First of all, very early on, if the crayon was in the box, I used it. And I think that probably goes back to childhood, because I always got the small boxes. And then when I was confronted with a lot of colors, this is a lot of fun. And so that's what I did. And that's a big change from where I am now. The other thing I do is I try sometimes to use the colors that I see when I have my eyes closed. Why do I see color when I have my eyes closed? And it's usually when I'm very relaxed and I get this rush of color. And for a while, I was trying to use that in my paintings. Early on, I was also very attracted to people like people that use color like Matisse, Bonnard, Wolf Kahn. This is a Wolf Kahn. And I looked at this painting and I said, how did he make those trees shimmer? So I'm guessing these are aspen trees, and it looks like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, quaking. And how did he do that? But then I started to use some of his same color combinations in my own paintings, and they seemed to move, and they had some depth, and I got curious about that. And so one of the tools I like to use is Adobe Photoshop. And so I plug in photographs of paintings I take. I'll take it from a book, or I'll put in my own paintings, and I'll analyze the different color combinations that I might be able to use. So let's take a look at Wolf Kahn's shimmering trees here. Well, the first thing you know is that he's using complementary colors in there, isn't he? It's red and green, they're opposite on the color wheel. But if I turn it to grayscale, they're essentially the same value. So that's how he's making the trees shimmer. He's using, some people call it discordant color, but he's using complementary colors opposite on the color wheel, and they're essentially the same value. Everybody knows that. I didn't. So this was a discovery for me. So again, that's part of my process of discovery. Everyone knew that discordant colors did funny things, and I didn't. So here's some discordant colors. They're essentially opposite on the color wheel, and you see them in grayscale, and guess what? They're equal luminance, equal value. Well, I decided to try this with eyes. So I put a little green in the eyes, I put a little red. There was nothing to stop me from putting in yellow and purple, and pretty soon the whole color wheel with blue and orange, and the eyes started to dance and shimmer because I was using discordant colors. And people said that the eyes looked real. And I thought, that's great, but real? When was the last time you saw someone with purple and green eyes? It's not out there. But it didn't matter. I was putting red, green, purple, and yellow in the eyes, and they seemed more lifelike. But what I learned is the colors didn't have to be lifelike to produce a lifelike image. Okay, so now picture yourself in my drawing group, and we've got a model there for a 10-minute pose. And you get the basic figure down, okay? You're feeling pretty good about that. Then you start working in the eyes, and you get the eyes really good. And you like to do eyes, so you spend a lot of extra time on them. Then someone says, we've got 1 minute left. So you panic, you scramble, and you scribble in the rest of the face, and you look at it, and you say, wow, that looks pretty good. So I started to tell people that all I had to do was draw good eyes and suggest the rest of the face, and your mind would finish it for you. I told people that the worst thing I could do was to draw a highly detailed hand, not as an excuse, but I shouldn't draw hands are very hard to draw. No one likes to draw hands. But I would tell them I didn't need to draw those highly detailed hands if it detracted from the focal point. Why? Because people were drawn to the detail. Then I told them I didn't have the color in the right place. I just had to be close. Your mind would put it in the right place. I said it was okay to color outside of the lines. What's more, by doing that, it seemed to add rhythm and movement to the composition. And the colors, of course, didn't need to be lifelike to produce a lifelike image. Now, I may not have been completely accurate there, but I intuitively knew that the brain was doing some of the heavy lifting here. So if I engaged you with an affecting pair of eyes, I could create vague shapes, line and color, like this. And when placed in context, it seemed to move and tremble and be recognizable as something real. Okay, how else could I use this? I love Franz Kline. Well, he didn't do a lot of figurative work. Did some, but not a great deal. But I'm always trying to figure out how can I put these strong black lines into my paintings. And so I started playing around with it. So this is a Kline. This is another Kline. This is a Kline. This is mine. This is mine. And that's my painting. So I figured out that I could use these bold, black, Kline-like lines for other features, other body parts, and people didn't care because they were focusing on the eyes. And this allowed me to create much stronger compositions. Okay, let's talk about light. This is one of those quick, maybe 30-second sketches that artists do. And I created a life-size painting based on this sketch. Painting just wasn't coming together. It was a big painting, and I was painting out of doors. And just sitting over here to my left was the garden hose. So I thought, you know, I've got this partially dried painting. I wonder what would happen if I just hosed the sucker down. So I picked up the hose, and I hosed it down, and this is what came out. And for the next year, I was trying to figure out, how did I create this illusion of light? And I looked at how other artists did it. I pulled out the books. What did Turner do? How did Rembrandt do? And I was a little dense about this. It wasn't coming through. I couldn't figure it out. And then on a different painting, I was doing what's become a signature of my style, which is to feather the edges of these big canvases of charcoal. And I started to see this gradual value change. And I noticed that it started to look like it was creating light. And I went back to this painting, and I finally recognized what I was doing. I had this juxtaposition of this abrupt contrast, you know, right against this gradual value change. And that's just like Turner and Rembrandt, although I doubt that they were using garden hoses on their paintings. But it was the same idea, and it worked. And that's how I learned it. It was a pure accident. It was a playful experiment, and I learned something from it. So back in my studio, I frequently changed the order of paintings during the course of working on them. And I noticed that they worked as a group, and they worked very differently when I changed different paintings out. And it was both graphically or visually they changed, but they changed how people reacted to them and how I reacted to them. And that's when I understood that the room was my substrate or my canvas, but that's another talk. And by the way, that's how I display them now. They're up on the ceiling, and they're down along the floor, and I put them together in these wild groups, but that wasn't enough. And I began to think about Rodin, and I thought, it's exactly what he does, what he did, didn't he, in so many cases. He repurposed and rearranged sculptural components for different effects. So I thought, well, how can I do this with my paintings? And this led to me to something that I refer to as proximity effect, which is something I came up with, but it's also about global abstract and local detail perception. So I thought, in a large gallery, how can I arrange faces like this and allow them to shift and change people's perceptions? And computers, of course. So I created this large-scale, maybe 12-foot video computer-driven exhibit, and it randomly selected faces, and it reprojected them every 3 seconds. And I could squint at them, and I could create this global abstract, and then I could back up, and I would see it as a global abstract, and then I would come up close, and I could look at the detail, and I was loving it. And then I started to let the metaphors flow, and I started thinking about this, and I thought, isn't this just like real life? That you know, we're measured by and reviewed by others by the company that we keep, and don't we have an effect on that group? And then I started thinking about the accident of birth and chance in life, and I was really on a roll, and I was really excited about it. And then I exhibited with really a lot of great instructional text, and during the show, people gathered around me, and they said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And so anyhow, I'll show you what the hell I'm talking about. And so they would change, and I would vary the speed. And if I slowed it down like this, people loved it. If I speeded it up, they complained because they didn't like having to not focus on the faces. And I'm not exactly sure where this is all going, but I was having fun with it. But it's part of the process. It's how one thing leads to another. You experiment, you see something visual, you play with it, you say, aha, I've got something. Some ahas aren't ahas, some are ahas, and it's great. So here's another real quick one. All right, back to Rodin. So I'm at the Met, and I'm standing in front of, those of you who know, the Burgers of Calais, and I'm going, oh, this is so great. And I walk around it, and I say, it's so great, and I walk around it some more. This is so great. And it occurred to me that it's so great at an infinite number of viewing angles. And I've only got one as a painter. It's right there, it's 2 dimensions. And I thought, now how can I do this? Well, computers, of course. And so I bought a program that would help me give the perception of actual depth and actual volume and give me an infinite number of viewing angles. So I had this great mannequin that I was able to form to the face I wanted, and then I was able to take my drawing and paste her on it. Now, don't get sick, but I can do all these great things with her. It's going a little slower than I want it to go, but it's back to The Exorcist. I've got her walking, I've got her doing all these things, but I'm creating this three-dimensional drawing, and it's great fun. You know, I'm not there yet, but it's how I work. It's the process. But I love this notion of sculptural-like depth and volume. I love the idea of violating the sacrosanct flatness of modernism and just playing with something new. Okay, let's wrap this up. So I briefly talked about a bunch of subjects, but there's a common thread there, and it's about process and discovery. Experiments, mistakes, accidents, and observation. It seems pretty basic, and there's nothing new. Artists have been doing it for years and years and years, but it was new to me. And today, while I'm still trying to understand how these visual perceptions translate to an emotional response, at the very core, I blew that, but okay, I'm going to start this paragraph over. And while I'm beginning to understand the ways that people are visually drawn to certain aspects of the physical art itself, that being faces, eyes, line, color, and light, at the very core, I do not understand why some art elicits an aesthetic or emotional response. But I just see that it does. And so here's just a very fitting quote to end on, Francis Bacon. Thank you.
And I'd like to invite the other panelists to come up here. This is perfect. We have the artist ask a question, and as we know, science can answer every question. So in just a minute when they get a seat, we will have a definitive answer on how paintings create emotional responses. Actually, this is the time when it's time for you to get involved here. So I think we have a couple of people wandering around with microphones. If you raise your hand, they'll come. There's one over there. They'll come around. So while you're getting ready to ask some questions, please put your hand up if you want a mic to come to you. But I have a question or two. I thought we might just start off with it. I will not ask you the deeper question of how what we see creates these emotional responses. But I thought maybe we could start with just one aspect of Bill's work, and that is he works with faces and with red. So scientists, help me out. What is that doing to us? Marge, you want to go first?
Well, I work on low-level vision, and Jeremy works on even lower level.
Feedback.
And Jeremy works on even lower level vision. So we're not exactly experts. We're not exactly experts on answering that sort of high-level question. But I will say that there are large parts of our brains dedicated to processing faces. It's actually my opinion as a scientist that is because we spend a lot of time during development seeing faces and knowing that faces are important for us. And so I think that's also true of red. I don't think there's anything privileged about red, the red pathway, except that we learn culturally and experientially, wow, that hurt, that red is a hot color. It's an emotional color.
And Jeremy, I was intrigued. You talked about how the world looks to, say, honeybees, and you know, as we all know in evolution, many things are conserved from honeybees up through people. Is there something that may be conserved from very early part of evolution that may be triggering something in us when we look at some painting that Bill has done?
My guess is that it's specific to our species, and maybe even specific to our species now. I mean, my guess, and this is more the naive observer than the scientist speaking, that when I see his paintings, there are two separate channels, two separate ways in which I'm taking in the painting. One is the more analytic, looking at the face, sort of straightforward, viewing the world channel, and then the simultaneously and sort of subconsciously, the red paint is adding an emotional overlay on top of that. And that, quote, colors the way I see the face.
What do you think, Bill?
Well, I've given this a lot of thought, and I can tell you, I don't know. I like red.
This is good. We'll start off with not knowing, because as we mentioned before, a lot of this conference is about what we don't know, and it's about questions more than it is about answers. So let's have some questions. Who's got a question over here?
As you beautifully showed, Dr. Nathan, despite our strong perception of culture, the visual world is deeply and inherently ambiguous. So what does that say about how the brain forms that perception?
Well, I think, maybe I should repeat the question. So the point was that there's an ambiguity inherent in the way we're processing visual information. Actually, Samir Zeki has thought about this very deeply, and especially in its relationship to art. I think we are, in a sense, sculpting the image, the meaning of the image, especially from our own experience. I mean, the low-level examples I showed, for instance, the subconscious or unconscious assumption that illumination is from the top. That's experience. If the sun were down below, if somehow the world was illuminated by a light source beneath our feet, we would see the cuneiform in reverse. I think that effect permeates our perception. I mean, everything that we're judging is based on those kinds of experiences, conscious or subconscious. Samir, what do you think?
Could we get a microphone to Dr. Zeki? Over here.
So maybe you should come to the podium.
I think we got a microphone is on the way here. Dr. Zeki.
Thank you very much. Look, I've got a number of questions and comments, and of course, there's going to be some disagreement. It would not be a scientific meeting if there were any disagreements. First of all, on the question of ambiguity, I think color is one area where there is no ambiguity. And I think this is due to the fact that it's an inherited concept. I mean, a green is a green is a green, whatever happens. And you cannot easily play around with that. But I want to come back to that. First of all, let me just attack Marge here, because she said that she did not study higher functions, but you do, because you study faces. And the question I would like to address to you is, do you think that faces, you made the statement, which I'm not sure I agree with, that we spend a lot of time, a lot of space given to the perception of face in the cortex because we spend a lot of time looking at faces, but I would suggest that faces are an inherited concept.
I know that most people think that.
And why do you not think that?
Well, so my lab did a lot of research on faces, and I realized as we were doing this that there is this idea that's prevalent among a lot of people that face recognition is innate because of the biological importance of it. But we also have, in almost exactly the same part of our temporal lobe, a part of our brain that's for processing letters and words. And that's not innate, right?
No.
So we started asking, and so I thought, well, there's this discrepancy between the innateness of faces and the clearly unnaturalness of reading. And so we started teaching very young animals to recognize symbols. And clearly that's not going to be innate, and it turns out they developed an area too for recognizing symbols. So I'm beginning to think that intensive early experience can cause modular organization in the temporal lobe in the same way it does in early sensory areas by experience-dependent Hebbian mechanisms. And you've got so much experience with faces from day one.
Well, I'll tell you.
So that's an easy mechanism, and it's already got a, a history for that.
I'll tell you of another experiment in which you show people deformed faces over a long period.
Adults or kids?
Adults. Hang on, don't dismiss it. And the activity in the frontal cortex does not diminish because they never adapt to it. Any departure, that's quite interesting from the point of view of Francis Bacon, the deeply deformed faces. So I'm not sure, in any case, children recognize, newborns recognize faces very, very quickly. So I suspect that's more of an innate.
I am aware of this bias in the field, and I am doing research now to ask if that's really the case, and I'm becoming skeptical.
Okay. In your cells, the cells that respond to faces, you said some have respond to some inter-eye distance, specific inter-eye distances, others to narrow ones. Are there any ones which would respond if the two eyes are outside the face?
So that stimulus we made, we got the eyes actually out to the very edge of the face. Totally implausible.
Yes.
And that was where you got the peak response. I don't know if it would keep going if the eyes were out here. I have no... We went way outside plausible faces, and yet we still got ramp-shaped tuning.
So
we were
you
surprised.
did a Francis Bacon.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I don't want to hog the whole thing. Maybe others can ask, and then I'll come back because I've got plenty more questions.
I'm sure you do. I'm curious, Bill, did you want to add? I was curious, you talk so much about eyes and not just faces.
Right.
And so since we got into this thing of when you move eyes around and stuff, how do your eyes, you say you don't use the regular colors, but otherwise are they represented as what we consider the kind of eyes we see?
Yes.
And you think that's an important connection to people?
They respond to it. And sometimes, actually the image that you showed, the eyes are kind of askew. And it's the same thing. But I haven't experimented with taking the eyes outside of the body or making them Picasso-esque. I haven't done that yet. Maybe on the docket.
Hey, next
I
time you're
love
here.
the way you get motion in your eyes by using equal value.
Yeah.
That's
and that was
phenomenal.
pure accident.
Or pure science, if you look at how color and motion are tied together. We have a question over here.
Hi. My wife, when she is asking for a kiss, well, my wife wears lipstick, and she wears red lipstick. And just getting back to your the idea of red, and it seems to be the most carnal color, and you're dealing with heads, rather beautifully done heads, and using red in its most carnal fashion. I would be very interested in knowing how you might approach the same heads with colors that are less carnal, less appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're using red in a very accessible way.
Yes.
And so it would be interesting to see you move someplace different. And again, I'm also thinking about babies' cribs and having that little smiley face that we kind of prop up above them. We tend to kind of always look at eyes. And so it's a nice way for people to spend time with work is always to go right there, but it would be interesting to see you move into another direction.
Yeah, and actually I've done that.
And Bill, before you start,
Sure.
maybe you could also talk just a little bit about how you perceive red. You mentioned having some color vision impairment.
Mm-hmm. I see red as red. I think at least I can differentiate red, but I always treat red like black. And so I will interchange them sometimes. I can't tell you why. I just started using the red because I like red. It's not blood. Well, that's what a lot of people say. Oh, you put blood all over them. That's really not my intent. If you choose to see it that way, that's perfectly okay, and I love that. But it's not where I'm going with that. I told you I like to use Photoshop. I'm always, because I'll go, man, I've been using red for 2 years now. Let's try something new. I pop it into Photoshop, and I'll make the red green or blue or purple. It doesn't work for me. Now, the only color I've found that works for me in this same way, that I'm either putting it on the face or putting it on, it appears like a screen in front of them, like it's a separate abstract expressionist painting, is orange. And again, it's so similar to red, and it's a kind of a reddish orange. And I started doing that on the bigger paintings. I hurt my right arm. I couldn't use it for 4 months, and so I started drawing and painting with my left arm. And all the big pieces there, like in the beginning that had the orange on them, those are all left-handed pieces. And it surprised me that I was able to do this. And I think it also got into, I went bigger because I couldn't draw smaller, and I think that had to do with my motor skills, small motor skill, as opposed to this. But just for the heck of it, I changed to orange for all the big paintings. I kind of said, well, I'll make a break here. I'm painting left-handed, and I'll do these orange. And the orange works. But they're definitely different because the orange pops out and the red hangs back. I won't say it recedes, but it's kind of on the same plane. And so now if I want the abstract expressionist marks to look like they're flying off at you, I'll put them in orange. If I want them to be more part of the picture, I put them in red.
And do you think that the reds that you see in your paintings are as intense to you as they are to people with typical color vision?
Probably not. That's what I think frequently. Okay, so I take a Ishahara test, is that right? Sometimes I can't even get half of them. I wanted to be a pilot, and that's critical, being able to see colors. And then other times I'll do a little better. So I think it's lighting, it's all kinds of things. But that's the red I've always seen, so it's hard for me to say whether someone sees it stronger or less so.
Sorry?
Oh, it's, okay, you go to the eye doctor and they have these dots, you know, and there's a number or something in there, and I always give them the wrong number or I can't see it at all.
So clinically demonstrated color blindness.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Color anomaly.
Impairness.
Color impairedness. Fair enough. Yes?
Hi, I'd like to offer an example in architecture of color use that is counterintuitive and get your comment on it. We designed a school a few years ago for highly distractible high school students who were not risk averse. They were the opposite, whatever that term might be. And it was a 4-story school building, and so they had to use the central stairs extensively. And what we did was paint those stairs with highly stimulating colors, lots of contrast. And when they got to the hallways, the long hallways that connect to the classrooms, we moved down a step to lesser contrast, less saturated color. And when they entered the classroom, extremely mild color and no value, very mild value. And the teachers report that the students were able to calm down through that process by transitioning between spaces. The idea, initially, the school reacted very badly to the idea of painting saturated colors in the hallways. So I'd like to get your response to that. I'd also like to mention a book that might be useful called Survival of the Prettiest by Nancy Edkoff, where she summarizes a lot of experiments about faces, the average face, babies' reactions to pictures of faces, and how those reactions seem to match those of adults. So if you could give me a little help on the color in the stairwells, that would be of interest to me.
Who wants to go first? Jeremy, take a shot.
It's different from my high school.
And how was your behavior in high school?
We better not go there. That's very interesting. I think that's the sort of thing you could imagine in extreme form. You know, for example, in the military. I mean, why do people all dress the same in the military? Well, there's a huge effect on behavior of how you view the world around you, yourself. It sounds highly plausible, what you're describing. Sort of subconscious, but plausible in terms of its effect.
I think it was time for one more question. How about right here?
Hi, I don't know why the phone's called now. Speak loudly.
Recording
Can you,
this.
I guess I'm wondering if you can maybe
Excuse
step
me.
back a little bit.
We're recording this. Can you give her a mic? Oh,
Hello, is this better?
Thank you.
Yes. I'm wondering if you can maybe step back a little and connect some of the dots. I understand that, you know, color provides all kinds of useful survival information. What would be the survival advantage of loving, you know, an art on a canvas, you know, something by Bill or something by Monet?
I think as a biologist, I would say, rather unkindly, it's an epiphenomenon. It's simply because our brains are so powerful and have been designed for so complex a series of tasks that art has basically fallen out as a side effect. Now, of course, it's one of the greatest things that could possibly have happened, but I don't think it was part of the Darwinian selective pressure that got us where we are today.
Well,
But much of
unless
culture
you
is that
count
way.
the ability to communicate.
Marge, you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think art comes out of communication, which is, I think, a fairly low-level survival skill. Artists are communicating with other people.
Bill?
Well, you know, that's what I hope I'm doing. And so I go back and forth, and I will say, okay, Guernica communicated something. Am I communicating something? And sometimes I think I am when I'm full of myself, and sometimes I say, no, I'm not, and I get frustrated. So I really don't know the answer, but the hope is that it does.
So I'm sorry, so Jeremy, so are you suggesting that it's, or saying, that it's, you do not think it's, that it's, the artists are, love for artists a learned response and not a inherited response?
No, not so much that it's in terms of learned versus inherited, just that we're not hardwired to be appreciators of art at a sort of Darwinian level. We simply have evolved an enormously complex central nervous system out of which art appreciation has naturally fallen. But that wasn't the thing that found the mate or got the next meal.
And the reason I'm understanding is out of which it was naturally fallen.
Let's see, how to explain this. Yeah, the question, so what does one mean by, how did it just sort of fall out?
And by it, go ahead and repeat the whole question.
Yeah, so the question is, how could you imagine a system getting complex and then properties emerging from that complexity that you wouldn't perhaps have expected or weren't initially built into it? I think there are many, I don't have sort of an answer, but I think there are many examples out there of that sort of thing. If you look, for example, at social complexity, say the economy, the stock market, for example, there are a series of individual players, each trying to make money, and yet the crash of 2008 was not predictable from each of those, maybe it was, but not by me, each of those individual elements. I think there are many examples when you get a level of complexity that's extremely high, you get a series of emergent properties that were not simply predictable from the individual pieces. And I would say art appreciation is in that category.
On the other hand, we often agree on works of art that are good. So it's got to be a mixture of cultural evolution and tapping into low-level things that we all share.
Aesthetic disagreements. We're going to get into that more in later sessions, but we're about out of time for this one. So I'm going to thank all of our panelists for speaking today. Thank you. There'll be about a 15-minute break, and then we will reconvene to listen to some music.